In this video, we are going to be talking about how I navigated through COVID using my intuition. This actually comes as an answer to a question from High Vibe Teaching. So I really appreciate the question. So High Vibe Teaching, this is for you. I've shared before how I receive puzzle pieces throughout my life. And then it seems like all of those puzzle pieces come flooding to my mind when a particular event happens. And then when the event happens, it feels like I've been given enough information to know how I should personally handle that particular situation. By the way, my name is Catherine. I'm an energy healer, spiritual coach, and nurse practitioner. If you need personalized coaching or an energy healing from yours truly, then you can go to my website at catherineglassman.com, or you can email me at hello@catherineglassman.com. So, with COVID, this actually starts from way before COVID, okay? I went through my spiritual awakening in 2018, or at least that's when it started, and then my awakening continued for at least 5 years after that. And of course, as we become more spiritual, we learn that we're constantly evolving and constantly awakening to new information and just to new ways of consciousness and new ways of being a human on this planet. But for all intents and purposes, my awakening started in 2018. So, when I was a pediatric nurse, I worked on the general pediatric floor for a couple of years, and then I went to the pediatric emergency room. I was always destined to be a nurse, and I think it was because not only what happened through COVID, but also just some other things that I would have never experienced had I not been a nurse. But those were more puzzle pieces, and so I'll have to just share that in another video because it will make this video way too long. But me being a nurse just became destined. Okay, so anyway, so I find myself in pediatrics and then in the pediatric emergency room. As standard protocol for at least in the triage area, which is where I often was, it was common practice to ask about the child's vaccination status, okay? So past medical history, allergies, are their vaccines up to date? And if they were not up to date, we would just have to ask why, just so that we could put it in the chart. At this time, now this is around 2015 maybe, where I'm working in the PEDS-ER. I had not gone through my awakening yet. I was very much a different person, and I drank the Kool-Aid. And I wanted to be a good nurse, but I also was indoctrinated into that system as well, into the medical system. And so my beliefs at the time about vaccines was that they were completely safe, that they were not linked to autism, because there was no research to prove that they were linked to autism, okay? And you were doing a disservice if you did not vaccinate your children, or if you didn't vaccinate yourself, because you weren't protecting the population that couldn't get vaccinated, or that the population that were too young to get vaccinated, or the immunocompromised, okay? So that was just my general belief. Of course, I would never shove this down anyone's throat, because I still, even before my awakening, I still had a healthy sense of knowing that I didn't know a lot. And so my humility and modesty was there for the most part, but I still had beliefs that kind of dwelled inside me. Now, I never participated in the conversations about judging parents or people about not getting vaccinated, but I definitely was among those that would. I would definitely be in the room, and I wouldn't say anything, but I definitely didn't speak up against it either. I wasn't really defending anyone, but I wasn't, I just kind of was present. And inside, I did feel like you should, But, I'm not a parent, so I don't know what it feels like to have to be put in that position. Okay. And so parents would come in, some of them would not be vaccinated, and some of them would have a legitimate concern about autism. And of course, I would think like, okay, they're just not educated, right? That was my thoughts. And that was that. So that's the general culture that I'm working in, and those are my personal thoughts. Until one day, a woman came in, and her oldest had autism and was vaccinated, and her youngest was not vaccinated and did not have autism. Okay, whatever. Still not convinced. Okay. Now at this time, she's my actual patient. So I have a section and she's my patient now. So I still ask the same questions just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I know that gets really annoying for some patients. It's not to annoy anyone. It's really just to make sure that we all have the same information, because believe it or not, information does change from the window, from triage, and then all the way to the nurse, and then even to the doctor. So I just asked the questions, and I don't know what it was about this particular day that made this woman want to tell me this story, because I certainly didn't ask necessarily, but I think maybe something happened in triage to spark this urge for her to explain herself, because I definitely didn't ask it in like a judgmental way. But I do have a feeling that maybe somebody kind of gave her a hard time about it. So she's in my section. I ask her like, okay, is your child up to date? Like, why is he not up to date? And she goes over and she shuts the door. So it's just me, her, and her kiddo. And she proceeds to tell me about why she didn't vaccinate him. And she said that she took her oldest son when he was 1 year old to get his vaccines, his 1 year vaccines, just like any other parent would do, because she wanted to be a good mom. She took him in, he got vaccinated, and the next day, so that night he was fine, slept. He was a little more sleepy than usual, but slept. The next day he had fevers and seizures for an entire week. And then after that, he was never the same. And when she was telling me this story, it was like she was fighting back tears. Like her eyes became watery, but tears didn't fall. So I knew that she was trying to be really strong. And I walked out of that room a different person. That was when I started to really question how much I actually knew about vaccines. The way that she told this story, I knew that she wasn't lying. I just knew it. And she seemed very defeated, and she seemed a little angry, but she didn't know who to be angry with exactly. And I think some of that anger may have been directed towards herself, right? And so there was just a lot of like conflicting feelings that I was having. And then, I still wasn't convinced that vaccines were bad, but that was definitely the day that changed me. And I was like, okay, I need to start being a little bit more open-minded about this, because I don't know something. Something isn't right. Okay, so that's where it started. Fast forward, now I'm still feeling like people should get their kids vaccinated, okay? So fast forward, now I'm doing my bachelor's degree, okay? I got my associates to become an RN, and then I was going back to school to get my bachelor's. During this program, it's all online. I'll be completely honest, I just wanted to get through it. Because some hospitals were kind of forcing nurses to get their bachelor's degrees and things like that. So I just wanted to get through it. And in one of my classes, I had to write a paper on something that's controversial in medicine. And I was like, oh, piece of cake, vaccines. And to me, I was like, oh, that's an easy A. I'm going to just write my paper as pro-vaccines. And that's that. Well, this paper did not turn out to be as easy as I thought it would be. And the reason why is because I knew I still wanted to write a good paper. I actually enjoyed writing papers. I was very good at it. And everybody knows that if you want to debate a side of some sort, you have to be able to debate for the opposite side. You have to be able to anticipate what they're going to argue back. And so I was trying to look up reasons why you shouldn't get vaccinated. All the adverse reactions, just all of the warnings, if there were any black box warnings, all the standard things that one should look up, especially if you're a nurse. And I couldn't find anything. Couldn't find it. And this raised a red flag for me because with all medications, all of them come with adverse reactions. All of them come with warnings. Maybe not all of them come with black box warnings, but a lot of them do. And I couldn't find a single one for vaccines. And so I kept digging and digging until eventually I found an article that came out of Japan that stated that they had removed the HPV vaccine entirely from their schedule because teenage girls were developing rheumatoid arthritis, Guillain-Barré, just all sorts of chronic autoimmune diseases. So they just removed it entirely. Meanwhile, in the US, that is definitely recommended, okay? So now I'm like, okay, I'm starting to go down a rabbit hole. I still can't find anything, but the one thing I do find is the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. This program was developed back in the 80s, late 80s, around the same time the MMR was introduced, as a way of keeping pharmaceutical companies from getting sued. So what was happening is that a lot of people were suing the pharmaceutical companies because they were getting injured from vaccines. Because the government and the vaccine pharmaceutical industry wanted to continue with the vaccine process, they decided to create this compensation program that is run by the government. And so now you just have to consent to the vaccine. As long as you consent, then you're basically stating that you are aware that something could happen. And if something does happen, you release all liability to the pharmaceutical companies. But if you do get injured in some way, you can apply for the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And if your condition gets approved, then they will compensate you monetarily. How much money you get compensated per thing, I have absolutely no idea. At the time when I found this, there were all the vaccines were listed, and there were so many disorders that were potentially linked to every vaccine. I mean, for just one vaccine, the list went on for pages. Anything from like a sore arm and fever, which is pretty standard for a lot of them, all the way to Guillain-Barré, cancer, thyroid disorders, death. Okay. So as long as it was on this list, you could apply to get compensated with money. This, to me, proved that not only do vaccines cause injuries because they're basically admitting to it, or else why would they compensate you if they didn't know that that was a thing, or if they didn't think that that was a thing, but that they also are actually kind of hiding it, and that they knew that vaccines weren't as safe as we were all led to believe. I did not know that this program existed. My mind was blown, and I went to so many doctors and pediatricians, right? So many nurses, different healthcare workers. Nobody knew that this program existed. Nobody. Now, when I talk about this program at the time, when I talked about it, I definitely sounded like a conspiracy theorist, even though this is a real program that exists. Like, you can go look it up. right now. I will tell you though that I have looked at it when COVID was happening, and that list has changed. They have definitely removed a lot of conditions, and I think it's because they know that that's basically an admission of that information. Okay. So anyway, that has changed. I will say though that autism was never on that list when I looked at it. Okay. Now, fast forward. At this point now, I'm very much open-minded now. Okay. Now I know that I don't know everything. And even in this paper, I did write that I basically took a very neutral stance. I thought that I was going to be like, yes, you should get vaccinated, and I wasn't. I said that every person and every parent needs to know all of the information, and there is a good probability that we don't. And that was my conclusion, and I actually ended up getting an A. So, I mean, yeah, obviously whoever was grading my paper kind of maybe knew that, maybe was also open-minded to it, okay? Now at this time, I'm still working with a lot of people that would not budge on vaccines. Very judgmental of parents and people that wouldn't vaccinate themselves or their children, okay? They were all anti-vaxxers and, just people following Jenny McCarthy, right? Just so much judgment around it. So now, because I am aware of this, I'm starting to not ask questions because I just need to chart something, but I'm asking questions now because I genuinely want to know if they went through an experience or not. And wow, so many parents have truly gone through their child getting very sick. And there were a lot of parents that genuinely believed that their kid was autistic because of vaccines. And I think the more open-minded I was and the more approachable I became, the more people came to me and they were honest about it. And it really broke my heart because we're all just trying to do our best. We're all just trying to do the right thing. We're all just trying to take care of these kids. And even when you feel like you're trying to do the best and protect your kid, you're just met with so much judgment. Like you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're talking about, and that you're just crazy. And so you're still actually not even getting the proper help that you are looking for. It's just a sad scenario. So now I am just 100% respecting parents not vaccinating their kids. I still was not like, don't vaccinate your children, but I definitely wasn't like, judgy, okay? So now fast forward to my nurse practitioner program. At this point, I am doing clinicals again, and during my pediatric clinical, my preceptor actually ended up being an old coworker of mine on the pediatric floor. Everything comes full circle, right? And that wasn't intentional. She just so happened to be my preceptor. And one day I was like, hey, so what's the worst adverse reaction you've ever seen from a vaccine? Okay, and I promise you, when I was asking this question, it was not because I was like obsessed with vaccines. I was not in that space at all. I honestly was just trying to make conversation, and it was more of like a, for fun or just out of curiosity, right? And she said that one day they gave the MMR to a 1-year-old, and the next day he died. I, needless to say, was not expecting that. That was definitely the first time I had heard that one. And I went silent. And she was like, yeah, the parents were very upset, and they called the clinic, said that they were going to sue the clinic, and, just basically screaming at them. And then maybe a few hours later, they called back and said that they weren't going to pursue any further action. Of course, the MA that gave the vaccine was completely devastated, tried to think if maybe she did something wrong, like just felt extremely guilty. And, after all of the things that I had gone through with learning about vaccines, I knew that those parents called back, not because they chose to not pursue any further action, but because they knew they couldn't, or they learned that they couldn't. They probably spoke to a lawyer, and the lawyer was probably like, yeah, there's nothing you can do because you consented. So this was a little before COVID, okay? So, and I really couldn't tell you. At this point, it had to have been after 2018, or maybe in 2018, maybe the beginning of 2019, because I know that I had gone through my awakening at this point, or I had started my awakening, but COVID hadn't happened yet. I was going through a lot. Late 2019 is when my dad died, and I was having a really hard time trying to get through nurse practitioner school. I wanted to quit every day, because the more I went through my awakening, the more I learned of how much of our system is broken, how much of it is so corrupt. And I felt like a cog in the wheel, in the great machine of everything. This is when I started to learn that the government, the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the food industry, it's all connected, and they all work together to keep us sick. And now I'm just a part of this system that I don't want to be a part of. Everything that I was learning were not the things that I wanted to practice. This was not this isn't how I want to treat patients. I started to learn through like meditation and channeling and things like that for the most part, the human body doesn't really need anything. It needs food, it needs sunlight, and it needs water. It needs laughter and positive energy, right? If we can give the body all of these things, the body will heal itself. And a lot of it all starts with energy. All of it. It starts with energy. If you can fix the energy, then the body will follow. But in school, I'm learning that you give this medication and you give this medication for that side effect. And, if not, then you refer them to surgery. And it just wasn't resonating for me. So now I'm definitely conflicted. And this is where I had more signs that I needed, that I was supposed to get through it. And because when I tell you that I was going to quit, I came very close. If I had not gone through my awakening and hadn't learned to use my intuition, I would have quit already. And there were multiple times where I was getting ready to throw in the towel, even just talking to teachers and because I had to take at least 3 breaks, which was against the rules. You could take 2 breaks max, as in like take 2 semesters off. I ended up taking 3 total because I just was struggling. For one, my dad died. 2, COVID happened eventually while I was in the program. And the third one, I was just going through my own awakening crisis. Like it's very difficult to be a nurse in the emergency room, going to school to be a nurse practitioner, and then astral projecting at night, seeing ghosts, hearing voices, channeling information, learning angels are real, learning fairies are real, Bigfoot's real, aliens are real, and that everything else that I've been taught, like the Bible is missing a lot, okay? A lot, all right? The church is corrupt, the government's corrupt, the government's probably run by reptilians. I wasn't super convinced at the time, but I'm 100% convinced as of today. And so, yeah, that's a lot for little me to go through. And I mean, I was having breakdowns. I was having straight up panic attacks sometimes. But then when I would go to a teacher and tell them that I am quitting, somehow they knew the right thing to say. And I felt it, and it kept me going. So I remembered having a conversation with 2 different teachers. Well, actually, no, it was 3. It was my clinical teacher, my theory teacher, and the director of the program. Because I talked to the director and I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And every single one of them, I honestly think that guides and angels were speaking through them to just tell me exactly what I needed to hear, just to keep going, just to keep going for another week, another month, another class. And one of them said, I've met plenty of nurses that regret quitting and wish that they had finished, but I had never met one that regretted graduating. And then another one said, once you become a nurse practitioner, then you can choose how you practice. You get to choose how you treat your patients. She's like, but if you remain a nurse, you will be taking orders. I was like, okay, that's a good point. And then, of course, the director, who I still contact from time to time, and she's still such a light and just a ray of sunshine every time I do. She just said to keep going. She's like, just keep going. You're almost there. Just keep going. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I'm just illustrating the struggles that I was going through. But there was one night where I had a breakdown. I've only been prescribed Xanax once in my life, and it was just a couple of, the lowest dose of tablets, right? And there's 2 times where I used them. One was in nursing school, the other was in nurse practitioner school. And I remembered on this night, I had a breakdown. I was just overwhelmed with everything. My dad died. At this point, COVID had started, and I was working full-time in the emergency room. I had clinicals, and I had a SOAP note, which the SOAP notes were basically like papers, and my particular teacher that graded them was very strict. I was overwhelmed. And so I remembered on this night, I needed to write the SOAP note. The next day I had clinicals, and the next 3 days after that, I worked 3 in a row. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I remember dropping to my knees and literally putting my hands in the air and looking up into the sky and saying, if you don't give me a sign that I'm supposed to keep going, then I'm quitting tonight. Of course, I'm like yelling at God, which one should not do, but God is very nice to me. And so I think there was an understanding. And so anyway, and then I ended up taking like my little Xanax because I was freaking out. And literally 30 minutes later, my clinical teacher called and said, hey, clinicals are canceled tomorrow, so you can just use that day to catch up on whatever it is you need to catch up. And of course, I was just like, and then I yelled out the F word as loud as I could, and I got started on my SOAP note. And that was my life for my NP school. So anyway, that's a little side story. I just wanted to share that with you. But now, so come like late 2019, my dad dies. And then I believe it was that same year is when COVID started. From what I remember, it was like around November, December is when there was some sort of illness happening in China. And then people were randomly just getting sick with this weird flu that wasn't popping positive for flu, but they were really, really sick. And I'm sure you probably know somebody that believes that they had COVID before COVID even became a thing. Okay, because I've met plenty of people, plenty of patients that would say that. So now there's this new virus that's coming out of China, and there's a lot of panic. And I started getting like floods of just intuitive hits that this is not what it seems, and that they are going to use this as a way of producing some sort of medication to push to the public. That was the information I got. And I remembered even posting something on my Instagram that said, whoever sells the panic sells the pill. And this was before the vaccine came out, okay? And I remembered getting a little bit of crap from like doctors and nurses who followed me, but this is just how I genuinely felt. Like there's some sort of, and it's not that I didn't believe that it was real, but I just didn't believe that it was exactly what they were telling us it was. I can only relate this same intuitive hit the same way I felt when 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, yes, I believe that it was happening, but there was something that didn't feel right. It just didn't make sense to me. And I don't even know how old I was. I was young. And I was just like, there's something that they're not telling us. They know something that they're not telling us at that age, okay? And then when COVID started happening, I was like, something's not right. They're not telling us something. And so as time went on and as the panic started to grow, I was so skeptical. Meanwhile, my colleagues, my friends, they were starting to genuinely get scared. They were starting to stock up, and they were worried about PPE and things like that. And I was like, something's not right. I just don't think, and of course I sound insane, so I'm not sharing this with anyone unless it's like my close friends. Now, I had some close friends who were also on the spiritual path, so I felt safe sharing it with them, and they also kind of felt the same way too. Like something just isn't adding up here. And so, of course, only time will tell. So as time went on, then, there were COVID cases in the United States. And for whatever reason, we didn't have enough PPE. You're telling me that supposedly the most powerful country in the world doesn't have enough PPE? It just didn't make sense. And for whatever reason, I knew, no, for whatever reason, okay, I ended up being the very first nurse to get the very first COVID positive patient in our hospital because I worked in the ER. And so this patient, it was an elderly Asian man, came in on a gurney, and I met EMS and started triaging him, printed out his wristband, put it on his wrist, and took him into my section. And he was COVID positive. And so it was obviously a big deal, and people were like, oh my God, like, how was it? Were you okay? And things like that. And he was very pleasant. He was a really sweet patient. And when I told him that he had COVID, he was like, what are you going to do? And I was like, yeah, so I asked him about his trip because he went on a cruise. And he was like, well, what am I going to do? Just not live my life? I don't have much of it left. And I was like, yeah, you make a good point. And so he ended up getting pretty sick, and I hugged him. I actually hugged a lot of my COVID patients when that was like a big no-no. But I knew that a lot of them he wasn't scared, which I appreciated, but a lot of them they were terrified. But he ended up dying like 2 weeks later. And so, especially after him dying, I definitely was hugging my patients because you just didn't know. And at this time, we're not letting family members into the rooms, and the nurses barely went into the rooms, right? I remembered I made up an excuse to go visit a patient because she was terrified, crying, alone. She was eating up the panic, and she was just terrified. I made up some reason, like we had a med for her or something. And so instead of sending it through the tube system, I was like, I'll just hand deliver it. So I had time. I walked up there, put on my PPE, and went into her room, and I just sat with her and just talked to her and just, tried to comfort her. And I remembered one of the nurses on the floor came in and was just like mortified that I was just sitting there. So I ended up leaving because I didn't want to get in trouble. But yeah, and I'm not judging anyone for the way they reacted, because that is exactly how this was designed. It was designed to cause panic. It was designed to put a lot of fear into everyone. And so that was intentional. But yeah, I saw right through it from the very beginning. And so at this point, there is talk of a vaccine that might get developed. And immediately I was like, okay, so that's the medication. It was not a medication or a pill that they're going to give us. It's going to be a vaccine. And so I knew that there was something that I didn't trust already. Now, as the vaccine is getting developed and things like that, I'm in the thick of it. I mostly knew like nurses and doctors, so we all were working, but everybody outside of that, they weren't working. They were at home. Many of them were still getting compensated, and they were just at home. Of course, they say that they were like miserable and things like that. And I was like, yeah, I still had to go to work, expose myself very much so, because I still believed it was a real thing. I saw it happen right before my very eyes. But yeah, and it's funny because I ended up having to pay taxes that year, and I was like, what a joke. Like, everyone else gets like a $500 check. Meanwhile, I need to just keep going to work in the emergency room during COVID, and I have to pay. It's hilarious. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. That's a whole human political opinion, I guess. So now there's a vaccine that's being developed. And it was funny because I was like, I wonder if all of the things that I had gone through when it came to vaccines in general was to prepare me for this. And I had this thought, but I was like, who knows? Like, maybe I'll still get it. I don't know. Because I was still getting the flu vaccine every year because I didn't want to wear a mask during flu season at work, right? And I remembered I got the flu vaccine around this time, and they were like, you should still get the flu vaccine. It will, And there was a group of us who got the flu vaccine around the same time. And interestingly enough, we all got COVID around the same time. And it got me thinking, and I was like, there's no way. That's got to be a coincidence, right? There's no way. And so I did some research, and I found a research article from the Army, the U.S. Army, that stated your chances of getting coronavirus, a type of coronavirus, not COVID, because COVID was not a thing up until this point, right? Because this paper was old. It was from like the 90s or something, like 97. It said if you got the influenza vaccine, it increased your chances of getting a type of coronavirus by 30%. And I was just so shocked that I was reading this from the paper. I'll have to find it, but from the U.S. Army. And I remembered presenting this to people who were like pro-vaccine and just didn't want to hear the argument anyway, because vaccines at this point had become a religion. It wasn't something you questioned at all. And if you did, it was blasphemy, right? It became a religion. It was not science anymore. the nature of science in itself is to question. But when you question science, it's blasphemy, right? And so I remember telling people about this paper, and they had some argument, some argument, right? It was just so interesting. But that was my experience. Like, it was just such a coincidence to get the flu vaccine and then to get COVID. It was such a trip. So anyway, so I have COVID now, okay? And I decide to watch Vaxxed. And now, at this point, I'm like intentionally like looking into vaccines, because I'm like, I don't think I'm going to get this vaccine, but maybe, I don't know. I'm still like open-minded to it, right? And I watched Vaxxed, and that is an eye-opening documentary. It's VAXXX, I think. Very eye-opening. It's basically just parents giving their own personal experiences of vaccinating their child and then the child getting injured. And then it also interviewed a gastroenterologist from the UK who ended up having his license stripped because of his research that linked the MMR to autism, which now apparently his research may actually hold some truth to it, right? And then also in that documentary, it talks about the CEO of, no, I don't remember what his position was, but he was one of the lead scientists, I think, from the CDC. And it was a phone call. And he basically was a whistleblower saying that they had falsified their research on the MMR and autism, specifically with African American boys. When I watched this particular segment, I remembered hearing this or finding some sort of information about a whistleblower from the CDC, but I don't know if I just didn't pay much mind to it, or maybe I was skeptical about it. But I remembered linking this memory that I had when I was doing my research on vaccines for that particular paper. And then I was introduced to a woman named Brandy Vaughn from this, I believe it was from this documentary that I learned about her, but I feel like I learned about her at a different time. And then when I watched the documentary, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's her. I don't know. That's the problem, right? Like, these puzzle pieces come in at different times, and I don't know exactly where I got it. I just know that I have the information. But she's definitely in this documentary. Brandy Vaughn, famous anti-vaxxer activist is what she's labeled as, okay? Her story is that she was a pharmaceutical rep for Merck. Okay, Merck is a pharmaceutical company, and they did indeed make their own COVID vaccine. She was a pharmaceutical rep, and they just basically sell medications, right, to like doctors' offices, and they really just push that out into the public. And I remembered considering being one when I came out of nursing school, because I heard how much money they make, and it was just a thought, but I never did that. So she is a pharmaceutical rep. She is, going to doctors' offices, taking doctors out to dinners and talking about their medications and things like that. And this is how that works, so that they can get the doctors to hold samples in their offices so that they can push that medication out to the public, right? And then they can get insurance reimbursement that way. And so while she was working for Merck, she started to raise some questions because she felt like there was some data that wasn't adding up. And while she was researching the medication that she was repping, she learned that they had falsified some of their data. And she was like, surely we need to correct this, because this isn't good. Like, I'm representing this medication. So she goes up to the administration, the bigwigs of Merck, and she was like, hey, this data is incorrect. We need to do something. And I don't know exactly what happened, but whatever they said, scared her to the point of moving out of the country. At the very least, they threatened her job, but I don't know exactly what they said beyond that. But she ended up moving to the UK. And she was there for years, and she ended up having a baby. And I think when her kid turned like 4 or 5, she decided to move back to the US because that's where her family lived. So I believe she went to California. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, because I'm literally recalling all of this from memory. I didn't sit and channel anything for this video. I didn't do any research for this video. This is just coming from my memory. So we all know that memory can be a little questionable. So she brings her kid back and she decides to take him to the pediatrician. And there was no pediatric office that would take her because her kid was not vaccinated. And so this upset her, but I think this is what really kicked off her movement to question vaccines. Why are you not seeing my kid because he's not vaccinated? It's not really your job to just only see children that are vaccinated. It's your job to just see children, to make sure that they're all healthy and that they're all okay. But there was not a single one that would see her. So after this, she just started campaigning for more research and, more informed consent rather than just regular consent. And she became famous in the anti-vaccine movement. Famous, okay? And so I started following her on Facebook. And again, this is during COVID now, okay? They're developing a vaccine, but it hadn't been released yet. I go to her social media, specifically Facebook, and she has a post on there and it says, "I never thought that I would have to write this, but I am telling you right now that I am not suicidal. I love my work, I believe in my work, and I live for my son. I have been threatened. Things have been happening to me." She said that her website was down for at least 3 weeks. She's being followed. She's like, "I feel like I might be in danger, but I want everyone to know that if something happens to me, that it was not me, and that whatever information I have will be released to the proper people." And I was like, wow, she's like being threatened and, something's going on here. Well, wouldn't you know it, 1 week before the vaccine came out, Brandy Vaughn was found dead in her home and was discovered by her son, supposedly from a heart condition. Okay. And so it's just strange that I'm having all of these experiences and being led down to watch, a documentary and then learn about this woman who just so happens to die 1 week before the COVID vaccine comes out. You can't tell me that that's a coincidence. You can't tell me that there isn't some force that is pulling me in certain directions so that I receive certain information, okay? And so then, while I have COVID, I had it for like 11 days. And it was a wild ride while I had COVID. I mean, every day was different. Some days I had chest pain, some days I was short of breath. I was always exhausted and I had neuropathy. I didn't panic that I had chest pain because I knew that that was just part of it. And so I didn't, I just meditated and I took a lot of baths. I took 3 or 4 baths a day, and it was for the neuropathy specifically because I was getting neuropathy in like my hands and my feet. And for some reason, if I took a bath, the bath water would stimulate all of my nerves. Like all of me would be touched by water. And so then my nerves couldn't be stimulated further after that. if that makes sense. So it was very soothing to just be in the water. But as soon as I got out of it, like as soon as like a shirt touched me or like the wind blew or something, it just like sent shocks in my body. So I was just in the bath all the time. I was falling asleep in the bath. But yeah, so 11 days. And then on the 11th day, I decided to do like this energy class via Zoom, and we were like channeling some energy and whatever. And I promise you, the next day, all of my symptoms were gone. Like, poof, gone. It wasn't like, oh, I felt a little better. Like, no, they were gone. And I was like, great. And I think I still had like a few days after that to not have to return to work. And so I just stayed at home and just enjoyed my time. And it was nice because I just kind of had like a nice break. I wasn't working. I wasn't in school at this time. I was either taking one of my many breaks, or maybe I was given a break because of COVID. I can't remember, but I definitely was not in school at this time. So I just got to relax. And so by the time I returned back to work, during this time, by the way, I was meditating and I was trying to figure out if I should get vaccinated or not. I had already seen all these signs and I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to get it, but I was like, what's going to happen when people do get it? And what I got is that autoimmune diseases and cancer are going to skyrocket with the release of this vaccine. Okay. And so I for sure felt like this duty to share that, but I also didn't want to look crazy, and I didn't want to I didn't want to trigger a bunch of people because, people were losing their loved ones too. And so to get on social media and say, hey, don't get vaccinated, I knew it was going to upset people because I had already upset a lot of people at this point because I had questioned it. And I mean, I had people reach out to me like telling me to shut up, that I don't know what I'm talking about, because I shared my experience about getting COVID after getting the flu vaccine. I shared information about that Army paper, about the research that I had found. And I mean, I was verbally attacked by colleagues. Okay. Not a lot. Definitely not from anyone that I presently worked with, because they are amazing and they're angels. But from people that I had previously worked with, people that I didn't have like a direct relationship with, had no problem telling me how they felt about it and about me. And so, and what was I going to say, right? Like, oh, I meditate and I can hear things and I get information, and so it's telling me that you shouldn't get the vaccine because you might get an autoimmune disease. Like, if somebody asked me and they really wanted to know my personal opinion, then I would tell them. I wouldn't maybe necessarily tell them how I believe that or why, but I would just tell them that we don't know enough about it and there hasn't been enough research. And so I would keep it very politically correct. And then, of course, with my close friends, I would say like, hey, I channeled this information. I'm not, I just don't think it's a good idea. So anyway, I basically had come to my decision, and then I got that information. I will tell you that when I got that information during meditation, it was devastating because I wanted to shout it from the rooftops, and I couldn't, because I didn't want to like lose credibility too, like as a professional nurse. But so I tried to do it in my own way with like sharing research and sharing my own anecdotal personal experiences and things like that. And that was all I could do. But by the time I returned to work, the vaccine had been available now. And there was a list of everyone's names. Before I returned back to work, I asked for a sign to tell me if I should get vaccinated or not. And so when I got to work and I saw this list, it had everyone's names on it. And when I looked for mine, there was only one name that was crossed out, and it was mine. And it said, not eligible, just had COVID. Which was so strange because other people had gotten COVID too around the same time, but for whatever reason, my name was scratched out. And so that was my final sign. And I said, okay, I'm not getting it. And I didn't budge after that. And so still to this day, I have never received a COVID vaccine. Was I scared that I was going to lose my job? Yeah. But after getting all of those puzzle pieces and then that final sign, I knew that if I did get it, something bad probably was going to happen to me. And that if I got it, it would basically, I believed that it would show that I didn't have enough faith. That I didn't believe the information that I was getting, that I didn't believe my ability to receive this information. Like, it was just going to be a moment, like a loss of faith. And I refused it. I was like, I believe in myself, I believe in my intuition, and I believe in God way too much to give in to fear. Whether it was fear that I was going to get sick, fear that I was going to lose my job, I'm not doing it. I was fully prepared to lose my job. I didn't want to, but this was the path that I was given. And so, eventually my hospital ended up offering like a religious exemption, and I applied and I got it. And so it was just me, one other nurse from night shift, and one other nurse who ended up getting a fake card that didn't get vaccinated. Otherwise, everyone else, almost like 200 people, ended up getting it, which, whatever, it's always going to be your own personal decision, because I would never be able to tell someone, like, you shouldn't get vaccinated. I never said, don't get vaccinated. I would always say, you should really do your research, and you should definitely meditate and try to make it an intuitive decision. Don't let it be a fearful choice, but really know that in your heart, this is the right thing to do. Because I do believe that some people were meant to get it. And I always was so grateful for the people that did get it, because they are the reason why we know the information that we know now. Of course, now, hindsight 2020, we have learned what it does and what it doesn't do. Even still, a lot of that research is fairly suppressed for the most part. It's kind of like it was swept under the rug. But I mean, it's just a quick Google search of what that vaccine has been linked to now. And it is a very, I don't even know there's got to be a term for this, for knowing something's going to happen, or knowing the truth about something and watching it unfold before your very eyes and not being able to do anything about it. Because of how open I became about questioning vaccines, many of my colleagues were approaching me and telling me their own personal story. Many nurses, many doctors don't vaccinate their children. Many of them who ended up getting the COVID vaccine, a lot of the women stopped having their period for like 9 months. Somebody lost their hearing or developed tinnitus permanently. I know one guy who went blind in one of his eyes. One woman just had like a complete nervous system failure and just ended up in a wheelchair And that was for at least a year. I haven't checked in on her to see how, because I didn't know her personally. It was like a local real estate agent who had talked about her experience, but she like just couldn't walk. And then of course there were also people that were dying. But, you know, working in the ER after the vaccine had been released, it was like clockwork, right? Like the day that you could get it, literally 3 days later, people started checking in. Nurses started checking in. Fevers, like COVID-like symptoms. I remember I checked in one guy who had a heart rate of 200, and the only thing that was different was that he got vaccinated. And, you know, and all the people that had like COVID-like symptoms, they all popped positive for COVID. And of course, at the time, you know, doctors and nurses that were still pro-vaccine were like, oh, they probably just had it already. And, you know, the vaccine just, you know, made it full blown or whatever, because this is a normal reaction. And the rationalization just went on and on and on. And even then, I even tried to share that on social media too, of like what I was actually seeing. Just the third day was the magic day, the magic number for you to develop symptoms and things like that. And of course, I was met with ridicule again. That's a normal reaction. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, if you did any research, and it just, yeah. But of course, these same doctors, these same nurses that gave me such a hard time also have stopped getting the vaccine. And I think a lot of them have started to question reality itself now. There's actually one doctor, he's an oncologist, who he gave me a really hard time. And he was a pediatric oncologist. And so, of course, I mean, just ripped into anti-vaxxers and like, you know, would make comments on my posts about the research that I found and things like that. And then out of nowhere, just recently, he like checked in on me to see how I was doing, just to say hi. And his demeanor is a little different now. And what's funny is that a lot of the people that have kind of like thought that maybe I was a little crazy at that time are the same people that continue to follow me or watch my stories. And, you know, whatever. So really, the moral of the story is that while you're going through your awakening, you're going to look insane. You're going to feel like you're going insane. But those of us that are going through an awakening are going to be given information, and it will be up to us to use that information not only to keep ourselves safe, but to maybe plant seeds in other people's minds so that they can stay safe as well. Whether they choose to take those seeds and let them grow is going to be up to them, but it has to start somewhere. And just always remember that your intuition, which everyone has, we are all psychic, that is a gift from God. And to ignore that gift or to go against it, that to me is blasphemy. So if you are starting to get puzzle pieces about a certain subject, a certain thing, please maybe journal it, log it somewhere, because it's probably the universe trying to lead you down a path that's going to be for your greatest and highest good. But with that being said, I hope you liked the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Bye.